So I will tell you, again, my name is Cornelia Davis. I work for Pivotal, and let me tell you a little bit about Pivotal, so we're a sponsor here. Pivotal is a spin-off, so I've talked to lots of people over the course of the last day who said, oh, Pivotal Tracker, which I think is awesome, that there's so much recognition around Pivotal Tracker, but the company Pivotal, not Pivotal Labs, which is what produced Pivotal Tracker, the company Pivotal was formed about a year ago, a little over a year ago. It's an offshoot from VMware and EMC, specifically to go after the cloud and big data space. Now, they're totally buzzword compliant, but there is actually some meat behind it. We brought together a number of assets, and one of the assets that we brought, and it came from the VMware side, is Cloud Foundry. How many people have heard of Cloud Foundry? Oh, that is so sweet. About half of you. Which is really, really great. There's definitely brand recognition. Cloud Foundry is an open source PaaS. Now, I'm not going to stand here and talk about Cloud Foundry for this talk, but I'm going to tell you about why a PaaS is relevant to DevOps. And there's a little bit of a story, a little bit of a backstory, and I'll tell you more about my background as I go along. I work as a platform engineer, so I'm in the core engineering team, but I tend to be more field-facing. So I have the wonderful opportunity to go out and work with our customers and our partners to see how the product is actually being used and bring that knowledge back in, to try to form the product, really understand what those hard requirements are, and I get to geek out with customers, which is really cool too. So let me give you a little bit of a backdrop of what it is that motivates us in the Cloud Foundry team and what motivates me personally. So a little bit of a backstory here. So great paper by Andreessen called Software Eating the World. It's already pretty dated. Well, I wouldn't say it's dated. It was written a number of years ago, but it's still incredibly relevant. And it's all about this notion that every single industry, even the industries that you didn't even think about being software driven, are being software driven now. So we've got agriculture that's being driven. Banks are being completely changed because of the way that the applications are being written. I have to admit that I was pretty late to Uber, partly because I live in a town that just got Uber recently. But I never hail a cab anymore. It is so sweet. It's a completely different experience. It seems small, but when I can open up my phone and say, hey, I need a ride, and I can see where the cars are around me, that's like totally different. So every single industry is being touched by software, and so we need to build better software, more software, and build it faster. And so back to this point, and we are working with quite a number of banks. I've engaged with numerous banks over the course of the last several months who are very, very interested. They're feeling the pressure from these upstarts, and they are saying, we have to change the way that we do things. Everything has to change. So it's all about building software faster, but even more importantly, it's about bringing that software to the people, to the consumers. It's about deploying it, keeping it up and running, continuous delivery, all of that stuff. And so we'll come back to that theme throughout the talk. So now let me tell you a little bit more about my background. I mentioned that I work on PaaS, so platform as a service. And when you have a look, how many people here think PaaS is for the developer? Oh, okay, good. So maybe some of you already know my punchline. When I first started looking at PaaS a couple of years ago, and still very recently, you see lots of articles that have titles like this: PaaS makes developers happy. Or in the meat of an article, for us, PaaS is a set of services aimed at developers that helps them develop and test apps without having to worry about a bunch of other stuff. And it goes on. So 2 years ago, when I first started working on Cloud Foundry, I said, and I didn't join the Cloud Foundry team at the time, I was still at EMC. I said, oh, cool. I think that the developer experience is still too hard. This is going to be great. I'm going to work on this product. It's all about the developer. Something that I thought was missing from most of these articles was I had spent the previous 6 or 7 years working at the corporate CTO office at EMC. So to Andrew's point, I am a propeller head. I am deep in the technology. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I tried moving up the management chain, hated it, and went back to technology. So I'm very much, I want to keep my hands dirty and in the technology. So I had spent the last half dozen years or so working for EMC at the corporate CTO office and helping product groups throughout the company come to terms with web architectures, service-oriented architectures, RESTful services. So I thought when I first started learning about PaaS, wow, this platform is awesome because it gives people return. It gives developers return on investment right away. And what I mean by that is I have been out there waxing eloquently about service-oriented architectures and RESTful services and said, you should do this because it'll make systems stronger, better, more maintainable. Well, what PaaS gave us was it gave us some guardrails so that if I followed some of those architectural best practices, I immediately got payoff. You mean I can automatically scale out my applications if I build them stateless? Whoo, that's motivation for me to build them stateless. So that was what I thought that they were missing here. And so I totally believed them. I believed that PaaS was all about the developer and about that developer experience. At the same time, though, I always had this kind of weird gut feeling because I was seeing all sorts of numbers about how big the PaaS market was going to be, how many billions it was going to be worth, and all this stuff. And I was like, really? Somebody's going to pay that kind of money to make a developer's life easier? I'm not buying that. And so I always had that kind of gut feeling, even at the beginning. And as it turns out, that over the course of the last couple of years, I definitely learned otherwise. It turns out that PaaS is for the operator, maybe even more so than for the developer. And so I've woken up, I have spent the last 25 years as a developer, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy crap. I'm square in the middle of ops. I don't know jack about ops. So that's actually going to be a theme that comes throughout the presentation as well, as I'm going to come back to that. I really don't know what many of you guys do. It's like mind-boggling for me. I spent 25 years in tech, I have a couple of degrees in computer science, and I have no idea how to configure a network. No clue whatsoever. But the good news is that people are starting to realize that PaaS is as much for the operator. And so there's a tweet there that says, finally, a concrete ops-relevant PaaS discussion. So people are starting to realize that. And that's one of the main things that I wanted to talk about here in the talk today. So very quickly, I do have a couple of snazzy marketing slides here, but they do have, I kept only the ones that have the punchlines that I like. So we sometimes talk about we sometimes talk about cloud being the third platform, mainframe being the first, client server being the second. Now we're in this cloud era. It's really revolutionary, very disruptive. It's the third platform. And we talked earlier about how this software is eating the world, and these expectations and the needs for software are definitely going up. I'll take a moment to basically point out that coming from VMware and EMC, Pivotal as a company, we're not focused on the consumer space. We're fundamentally focused on the enterprise. So we are talking to very large enterprise customers throughout this, and I'll come back to that theme throughout as well. So business expectations at these large corporations continue to go up, yet your IT budgets are steady state. And many of you are probably saying, yeah, if only it was steady state, that'd be great. Maybe it's even going down. And so then the ability for IT to deliver on that. Now, first of all of you IT guys get kudos for this because this is staying flat, but you're delivering more. The thing is that how many people here are being asked to do even more than what you can deliver? Right? It's this huge gap here. And so that's really what we're going after, is we're going after how do we fill that gap? How do we make that better? Now, sure, we can make that partially better by making development easier. But I develop software once, and then I deploy it and I maintain it for a long time. The initial development is something that happens only once. And so it's all of that operation stuff that happens further on that is more expensive than the initial development. So we talk about then developers and operators. So I think I've already emphasized that point, and hopefully that's coming through loud and clear, that I'm really, really interested in not only the developer experience. Yes, for me personally, that's where I came from, but we're interested in the operator experience as well. We do want to make developers more productive. And in one of the talks yesterday, there was the great slide about, oh, you damn agile teams, you're creating software so fast that we can't keep up in terms of operations, in terms of deploying these things. So yeah, we want to make the development teams more, we have agile teams, we want to make them more productive. We want to give them the ability to innovate without putting barriers up. Oh, I have to configure all these systems to be able to innovate. Wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to do that? So yeah, the developer is certainly part of it. But then on the operator side, we want to address things like continuous delivery, no planned downtime, rolling upgrades, instant scaling of apps, automation. So the Docker conversation that we had just a moment ago, and idempotent was a word that was used a bunch of times. When you do deployments, you don't want snowflakes. So you have to start from scratch every time you deploy, because otherwise you may not be able to repeat that deployment, right? So if you're constantly adding to something and you're not doing fresh installs, you could very easily get into a state where you just can't get there from here. You don't know the roadmap anymore. Other things that we might want to do for operators are, let's make the systems themselves and the applications running on them more resilient so that I don't have to constantly be bringing them back up again. And I'll come back to that theme in just a moment as well. So the whole punchline is that PaaS is really for the DevOps. It's for both sides of this. And I'll break that down a little bit more in just a moment. I want to make sure that I stay on time here. So, not to be outdone with gifts, and I'm thrilled that they show up. So I mentioned that I work with a lot of enterprise customers, large banks, insurance companies, media and telco, that kind of thing. And what happens in these large enterprises, when I start talking to them about DevOps, is I get this. They're like, oh, no. We are not ready for that. We are not doing DevOps. Our developers don't know the first thing about operations, and our operations guys don't write code. We don't do this. And at that point, and I'll remind you that I don't know Jack. I don't come from the operations side. So I came up with my own definition of DevOps, and I think it's actually fairly sound. Sometimes having somebody who is clueless coming in, they don't have the background anymore that's kind of constraining their thinking. So I like to think that being clueless is maybe an asset here. But here's the thing, is that DevOps, to me, does not mean that the same person is doing development as is doing operations. It doesn't have to be the same individual. That's not going to change in the enterprise anytime soon, because you know what? The people who are deploying to production are a very, very small set of people. And if I went into an enterprise and said, hey, if you want to start using our product, you need to allow your developers, a whole large set of developers, maybe 3,000 people, to start pushing things into production, that's a non-starter, okay? So DevOps is not about having the same person doing dev and doing ops. It's about removing the barriers between the developer experience and the operator experience. Now, we've talked about that already in the last day. We've talked about that from a cultural standpoint. What I'm going to do here is talk about the tools, talk about the environments. It's really, if we can provide the same environment for the developer as we do for the operator, then that's a big part of the barrier that's gone. So I mentioned I work for Pivotal. One of the assets I think I mentioned that came into the big Pivotal company was Pivotal Labs. So Pivotal Labs is an extreme agile, extreme programming consultancy. And I've spoken with customers that were absolutely delighted with the development, with the applications that were built by Pivotal Labs. And I have paired on projects in the labs office, and it's amazing. It's all pair programming. It's such a very cool way of developing software. And I've had these customers who said, wow, yes, the app that you guys built, that Pivotal Labs built, is just, it's rocking. It's awesome. And yeah, they delivered it to us 2 months ago. And oh, great, how's it going in production? Well, we haven't gotten it there yet. Because it was one of those things where Pivotal Labs built the app and then gave it to the customer, and the customer had to deploy it. And it was extraordinarily difficult for them. It's about removing that barrier and saying, well, gosh, if the development environment and the environment where I did my dev and my initial test is the same as the environment that I'm deploying to, that's a huge win. So it's all about the homogeneous environment going all the way across. So that's really what this slide shows, is it says, okay, when I start in development over here, I'm developing my applications, and I'm doing things like generating my WAR files if I'm in Java, and in the enterprise, people are largely doing Java. Yes, some .NET too, but most of our customers are doing mostly Java. They're starting to do other things up at the web tier, but they're still, even there, they're doing an awful lot of Java. So they're creating the WAR file, and they have some other stuff going on around that. So they have Jenkins, and they have source code control, of course, and they have that whole process where developer checks in code that automatically kicks off a Jenkins process that does a build, runs some unit tests. And what we're doing increasingly now in Pivotal Labs is a part of that development process, we deploy into the cloud. And we're deploying into a cloud, and we do run tests in the cloud. And then the great thing is that when I'm done with that, and I've satisfied myself on the development side, and I'm ready to push it over to QA, it's exactly the same artifacts. Not kind of the same artifacts, not the same artifacts with maybe different chef scripts or different configuration files or anything like that. It's exactly the same thing. And if my QA environment is set up to accept the same thing that my development environment is set up to do, and the same thing with production, then I've removed barriers and I can start doing DevOps. Now, here's the title of my slide is No Conditionals Allowed. So you're not allowed to write a big old script of 15,000 lines that says, if I'm in dev, then do this, and if I'm in QA, do this, and if I'm in production, do this. No, you're doing the same stuff across all of those. All right, so really quickly here, you might have seen similar slides to these. The way that we used to write software is on the left-hand side. We were responsible for the entire stack. Infrastructure as a service, even internally inside of an enterprise, pretty well entrenched. People get that. They don't have to set up OSs or virtual or machines anymore. They get virtual machines. Platform as a service takes that next layer and it says, okay, so your app server tier, your database tier, messaging, all of these other services, we're going to put those things as a part of a PaaS. Now, this is also a little bit of a marketing slide, and they like to show you here that your application code is shrinking as you go across. Not sure I buy that. The application code's probably just as big over here, but the point is that I don't have to do all that stuff under the covers. And so I want to point out here, though, that there's a couple of categories of individuals. You still need people who understand networking. You still need people who do all of this. But then you can have people that are up here living in the application world. This is another place that we can break down the barriers, is that you know what? I am probably never going to understand how to configure networks, and I'm okay with that. I don't have to learn your skill set. You guys are rocket scientists. I'd rather just stay up here in my application world. And so being able to break out operations into the people who are doing infrastructure stuff and the people who are operating my applications is really valuable. So this is just a really quick screenshot of our particular PaaS. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned it's all open source, so Cloud Foundry is all open source. But what you can see here is that I don't get virtual machines. This is not my Amazon EC2 console where I get virtual machines and I have to deal with virtual machines and networks and security groups and all of that stuff. I'm dealing with applications, services like relational databases, but I do have access control set up. So all of those things, this is application, we sometimes call this app and services dial tone instead of infrastructure dial tone. So I've been kind of belaboring the point that it's not just about the developer. So let's talk about some of the potential operational benefits. So wouldn't it be great if when I deployed an application, I didn't have to configure a router? I had it automatically configure for me. Yep, we can do that. And when I say we, I mean we as the industry, we can do that. We can automate that. That can be part of the platform. Streaming and log aggregation. So now I have, and let me jump down, auto scaling and scheduling. So I deploy my web app and I get all sorts of load on it. Now I need to scale it out. Can I just have the system auto scale it for me? So that when I have so much load on a particular node on my application, that instead of having 5 web tier app instances, I double that to 10. Can't I have it do that automatically for me? Yeah, we can. Let's shoot for the stars. Now I've got 10 instances of this application that are running on virtual machines all over the place. Do I have to SSH into each one of those to take a look at the logs? Nah. Let's do aggregation on those. So that's an operational benefit. We obviously don't want to allow everybody to deploy to production. So you need role-based access control and some other policies around there. Wouldn't it be great if the system could just watch what's going on? And if applications are dying, have those applications automatically restarted for me? And I mentioned that that's one of the benefits. If you build stateless applications, hey, wouldn't it be cool? You can just restart that up on a different node. Application performance monitoring across all the different instances as well. And let me take a moment here to go back to a comment that Eric said about Docker. So if I'm running my application loads inside of Docker containers, and he mentioned Cloud Foundry on his slides there, if I'm running it in those lightweight containers, which by the way are so incredibly critical for us having a blank starting point every time we do a deployment, avoiding snowflakes, I've now got these Docker containers or other types of containers that are distributed all over the place. And I want, when I'm talking about this aggregation, it's pulling things together. So I think, Eric, you made a statement that I really loved, which was, yeah, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, but you said something like, yep, if you don't have something that's helping you manage all those Docker containers, then you've got a management problem. And so that's really what we're talking about here, is that platform as a service offers one of those things that allows you to manage all of those containers and those applications that get deployed. So in closing, what we really want to do, this was our goal. And I'll go back to the statement that I had no clue that I was doing ops when I started in this gig. I thought I was doing dev. And so, but what we're really trying to do is we're trying to take this, which is actually an application deployment process that we got from a customer. These are the steps that they have to go through in taking an app from dev into production. And we want to change that, and we want to say, no, that's too hard. Allow somebody to set up a platform that automates all of those things for you so that you can streamline it. And you want to have the application lifecycle. So some of my colleagues still talk about PaaS in terms of the developer. When I'm talking to customers, I talk about PaaS in terms of your application lifecycle. That's where I spend most of my time. So it's all about streamlining that application lifecycle. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. You can see my Twitter handle there. And I don't know if I left any time for questions. I did. I got 3 minutes early, so I have maybe the 5 minutes left over. So any questions? Yes?
The slide in which you showed the extremely long process of getting from development to production, would you say that that trend is changing at all, or are you still going into a lot of companies and finding that it's a process exactly that dreadful?
Yep. So the question was, this is pretty dreadful. And is this really still happening, or is this going away? Is this a thing of the past? And the answer, unfortunately, is that this is still very, very much the case, especially in large enterprises. Now, I spoke with one customer recently who going back to this picture, they had automated a whole bunch of stuff right here. So they had it after the initial development was done. Then they checked everything in, and when it went to QA, it was automated. So they had their artifact repository, they had their Jenkins, they did automatic builds, they did automatic deployments, they automatically spun up machines, blank machines, so they got that right. They knew that they needed to do that. So they spun up blank machines and deployed the software in there, and then did their QA, did some automated tests, and then did some user acceptance tests as well. And they didn't have this homogeneous environment all the way across the board. Their developers were still doing things differently, and when it came to production, they were doing things differently. And we had a great several-hour talk one afternoon, and he and I spent a lot of time and kept coming back to this. Unless you get this across the board, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And he was saying, I know, we need to get that homogeneous environment. Now, part of his challenge there was that, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well, is getting this side of the house to buy into it and this side of the house to buy into it. So part of his challenges were definitely cultural, not just technological. But yeah, unfortunately, that's still very much the case. Yes?
How do you practically have a homogeneous environment with those configuration changes in your production database is one thing, and your industrial database is another, and the networking probably has specifics to it as well. So in a practical sense, how do you avoid those kinds of no conditionals and no changes?
Yep, it's all about abstraction. So the question, to repeat the question, is how do you actually do what I'm up here talking about? And if this was something like Spring 1 where we have an hour-and-a-half talks, I would have done lots of demos and showed you that. But in a half-hour talk, I had demos in there, and then I decided, I always go over if I put demos in there. But the reality is it's all about abstraction. Now, that's an easy thing for me to say, is you have to abstract the right things. But what we're doing there is that I didn't point out, but we have a notion of being able to partition your cloud, your platform, into various spaces. Those spaces, in addition to having access control policies, also have, that's where they encapsulate certain things. That's where they encapsulate the set of services, for example. So to be very pragmatic, when you're over here on the development side, you would expose a service. Remember, I talked about application and services dial tone. Your database service over here might just be a stubbed out database. So I'm going to bind to my customer database over here, and what I'm going to get bound to is a stubbed database. Then I come over here and I'm binding to exactly the same thing by name. There's a registry, that's part of the abstraction. My customer database, and I get a database that now has real customers but doesn't have PII in it. And then finally, when I get to production, that's where I've got my lockdown database. So I actually have instances, different services deployed in the different spaces. And when I deploy my application and bind to those services, I'm binding to the right, the things that are relevant to that space. Exactly. Great question. Super. So that's part of what we're trying to do in the PaaS, is we're trying to set up those abstractions so that you can do these things that I'm talking about kind of in a hand-wavy way here. Any other questions? Yes?
So in this sort of development environment, what sort of tools do you see people use for DevOps when they move their apps and the services
Okay, so the question was, what type of tools are people using in this DevOps setting? So the reality is that the tools might be a little bit different depending on where you start through this life cycle. So first of all, let me answer a question that you didn't ask but you came close to, which is, hey, does the developer still have an IDE, and do they still have a local version of their database and a local RabbitMQ, for example? And the reality is that most of them still do, because you do local development, you do development on your laptop. You can't wait for things to push up into the cloud. But then when you start pushing things into the dev environment, some of those tools certainly are available to the developer, but the developer's probably not going to spend too much time doing JMX, looking at the components of their cloud, for example. Although certainly the developer's responsible for performance at some level, or maybe they're not. Maybe the QA people are the people who are doing performance. But the types of things that they're going to do is they're going to do application performance monitoring tools, so that when they deploy an app into the PaaS, they automatically have they have a dashboard that they can go take a look at. They have log aggregation that they can tie to Splunk, Logstash, any of those things. So the tool set is there. It's part of the platform. So as soon as you deploy something, you automatically get all those services, you get the routing, you get all of those things. Now the developer's probably not troubleshooting it, looking for the same things in the logs that the production person is. But a lot of those tools are just come out of the box in the platform. So, all right. So I think now I'm right on time. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.